Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of the WatchRolling.com podcast, a veteran-owned podcast that focuses on watch collecting with the goal of helping veterans. My name is Jason, and I'm your host. If you're new to the pod, welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. Last week, we discussed the DoD Skill Bridge program, which is pretty sweet. Has a bunch of stuff and a bunch of resources for people that are getting ready to transition out of the military. And then for the watch collecting part of the podcast, we discussed about how it's important as a new collector to realize that you don't know what you don't know, and to listen to those that are more experienced around you so you can get some experience and not make some of the mistakes that I made. Last week, we also had a Tuesday live stream and the Sunday live stream with Sam from Casual Watch Talk channel on YouTube. They were pretty interesting conversations. On Sunday, we had an auctioneer on board for the program, and I had some technical difficulties, but I watched the program and it went well. The gentleman answered tons of great questions. There was a bunch of Q&A with people in the audience, and it was just a great time. It's unfortunate that my computer crashed. It is what it is. I've got the problem solved, and I look forward to the live streams this Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and Sunday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll make sure to put those links in the show notes. This week's episode is sponsored by Mushi Watch Straps. Mushi Watch Straps is a veteran-owned business and provides well-built and fairly priced NATO straps, two-piece straps, leather and canvas straps, as well as watch tools, accessories, and storage. I'm still loving the fluted NATO strap. I wear it with everything. I actually own more than one. They're fantastic. It comes in different colors, but the gray ones for me are just a sweet spot. Make sure you use the code VET10 at checkout for 10% off your entire order. That's Victor Echo Tango 10 at checkout for 10% off your entire order. And I will also include the link to Mushi Watch Straps in the show notes, and they can be found at www.mushiwatchstraps.com. So this week, we're going to go ahead and discuss how the VA has developed national standards for healthcare professionals. And it's a total of 50 national standards, which is pretty cool. I'm not going to read them all, but once again, I'll give you a brief rundown, and I'll include the links in the show notes. It's pretty interesting stuff. I think you'll find it if you're involved in the VA or you use the VA for healthcare. I think it's gonna be good, especially if they implement it and stick to it. And then I'm going to discuss. I just released a 3-part watch review for the Zodiac Zulu Oscar 9209 Super Seawolf. And this was a special edition that was sold only in military post exchanges, and we got ours at the Navy Exchange. And it's a faithful recreation to watches that were produced in the late 50s, early 60s, primarily in the Vietnam War, and were used by service members. The closest reference I could find was to the 699 dial, but I was able to get a review written for myself because I own one. My wife owns one, and she wrote a review. And my buddy T, who's at Life Watch and Life Doing on Instagram, he wrote one. He's active duty, and I compiled all three and did 3 separate reviews called The Pack of Wolves, and we published them. So I want to go into the methodology for that because I think it was pretty cool to get 3 distinct different opinions and points of view, and also to see where the 3 points of view kind of tied in at the same time. I think it's pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to talking about that. In the veteran-related news portion of the podcast, the VA has developed the national standard for healthcare professionals, and what they've done is they've published its first of 50 national standards of practice, and they did it in the Federal Register back in June, 30 June to be exact. And it's going to be a standardized set of services that all healthcare professionals in a given occupation can perform within the VA, regardless of what's permitted by state licensure, certification, or registration. And that's going to be per the authority of the VA professionals to healthcare. Now, that's verbatim what they said. I think it's important to do it verbatim because I'm not trying to paraphrase anything here and then, someone goes off of something and I said, and it's not exactly right. And they interviewed a couple of people, Undersecretary for Health, basically laid out that they've undertaken this plan over multiple years to develop these standards of practice. And it's for the 50 healthcare professions that are inside the VA, and they want to do it to be able to continue to provide safe, high quality care for veterans. And it's going to ensure that the VA can deliver services in regions other than where they may be licensed, registered, certified, or limited by state requirement. So veterans get the care they need. And that's verbatim too. So basically, they want to be able to provide you services if you're in a region that doesn't get those and they can provide them to you. So that way, just because you live somewhere, you're not being able to get the care you need. And I know it's important because I've known plenty of people that have, retired or transitioned out of the military and they live in the middle of nowhere, quite frankly. That's where they want to live. And sometimes they can't get the help they need, but now they'll be able to. So one of the ones they discussed is the proposed national standard of practice for the blind rehabilitation specialist. It's consistent with 4 national certifications from the Academy for Certification of Vision Rehab and Education Professionals. If you're a blind rehab specialist, you're going to continue to practice in the VA set by the national certification. Actually, there is no national or state license or certification for visual impairment services, according to the VA article. They're just going to adhere to the national standard for the occupation in which they hold a license, certification, or registration. So this development of national standards enables the VA to move healthcare professionals throughout their organization pretty fluid and pretty rapidly. It's also going to support VA healthcare professionals so they can practice across state lines and create a standardized practice and business operations across VA medical facilities. So if I'm reading between the lines here, what I'm thinking, what they're saying is like, maybe you're in a state that's kind of close, like Ohio and Kentucky, and you're a professional, and because they have a set standard of practices nationally across the VA, maybe this week you work in Ohio and the next week you work in Kentucky, and because you're following the same set of standards and practices, you don't have to really worry about changing too much or not following the rules or a different set of rules, and maybe you don't meet that criteria because you're trying to remember different rules in different places, but now you won't have to because you have a standard set of standards. Yeah. So the VA said that they talk about how they're using a pretty robust and interactive development process. I'll include that link in the show notes so you can see it. They're consulting with internal and external stakeholders. For those of you who aren't familiar with, business stuff, you got internal stakeholders and it's people inside the organization that stuff matters to, and external stakeholders. So this could be whether it was they're partnering with, civilian medical facilities or stuff like that. Everyone gets a say to make sure that it's meeting all the requirements for both inside and outside the organization. They're also going to talk to state licensing boards, VA employees, some federal label partners and stuff like that. And specifically veteran service organizations. So that's a good thing to see too, because it probably means that they want to, I know some VSOs transport people back and forth, veterans back and forth to their appointments and stuff. So they probably want to be able to make sure that they have all the accurate information they can get, and B, they're working with the VSOs so the VSOs can stay up to date and keep people informed. So they're going to share all their standards when they get them done on the Federal Register. It seems like they're vetting it pretty well and they're getting a bunch of input. It'd be nice if people actually put in input, useful input, and the VA took it and made some changes so you can get some pretty good, solid healthcare across the board. And then once everything's approved by VA leadership, it'll be published as an appendix in the new Veterans Health Administration policy. And it's going to discuss this policy will discuss, all the basic stuff that applies for national standards, including oversight, reporting, implementation, training, and recertification. You can also visit the National Standards website for additional information. Subscribe to the newsletter. It's just nice to see that the VA's trying to standardize practice across the board to ensure that everybody gets standardized healthcare and the very best level of healthcare they can get. So for those who don't know, on the watchwilling.com blog, did a series of reviews called A Pack of Wolves. And what it was a 3-part review of the Zodiac Super Sea Wolf, the Zulu Oscar 9209. These were primarily sold at they were only sold at military exchanges and post exchanges. There's some on Hodinkee for sale now. And they're just a Zodiac Super Sea Wolf, but they're faithful recreations to the late 50s, early 60s sea wolves. And the earliest dial reference I could see in timepiece reference was the Zodiac, the 699 Sea Wolf. And they're beautiful. I mean, I'm probably biased, but they're just beautiful timepieces. And when my buddy was searching for his first watch, I helped him find, we narrowed it down. We were looking around at the exchange. And when he saw this Super Sea Wolf, he fell in love with it. And as he was checking it out and I was handling it, I instantly knew it was something that my wife would like. My wife has smaller wrists, like 6.25 inch wrist, and she loves dive watches, but usually the stuff's too big. And it's not a matter of like they're too big for she doesn't feel comfortable in society wearing them. No, they're just too big. Like she's like, they're too heavy, wearing them all day. She's an educator. She's like, it just weighs me down. It kind of gets in the way. I'm banging them up. And when I saw this Super Seawolf, it's about 11 millimeters thick, 40 millimeter case diameter. But it's one of those cases where there's no case really protruding outside of the diameter of the bezel, right? Most of it's inside. It doesn't have super long lug width. The whole thing is just honestly pretty sleek and refined. And when I took it home, sure enough, it was a winner. She loved it. The one big issue she had is that the bracelet almost didn't go small enough. When we took it to get it sized for her, the jeweler was like, "Oh man, if this doesn't, ma'am, if this doesn't work, this is the last notch I can take the bracelet down." And sure enough, it barely fit. And as of right now, it's still a little too loose for her. So I'm gonna take it out here in a minute and put a strap on it for her so she can wear it on a NATO strap. But she loves a timepiece. And so I took, my buddy purchased his. I took this one home for my wife. And the more and more I looked at it before she came home, I was like, man, I love this thing. This thing is awesome. And so I went back. They had one extra. I got myself one. So all three of us have the same timepiece. And as we were all talking, it's just something I naturally do. My buddy T, who's at Life Watching Life Doing on Instagram, go give him a follow. Uh, Me, him, and my wife all have the Navy in common. I'm retired. My wife's a Navy brat. I don't like that term, but that's the term they use. And T is currently active duty in the Navy, and so we all share that connection. And the more we read about the history of Zodiac with the Navy and stuff, it just kind of drove it home a little bit more. Now I did a bunch of research in these reviews. Uh, I did a bunch of them, to try to share with everybody of trying to find actual either pictures or stories of people using the zodiacs, and it was really really hard. I went to the National Archives, I went to the Naval Historical Society. Like I was just digging through pictures, I was looking at the SEAL UDT Association stuff, and I couldn't really find anything other than a SEAL UDT Association advertisement, but it was for a watch, a Zodiac made in the 80s. It's not necessarily this one, but I have a plan. I'm going to execute it, and I'm going to go talk to some people and try to track down some people that might have actually worn a version of these in Vietnam and get their stories, because I think it's kind of important that we capture those stories and keep them. But I couldn't find anything in time for the reviews other than some advertisements and stuff, which is fine. Uh, I was trying to get the reviews out and get everything done. So it wasn't the end of the world that I didn't get them. But us having all the Navy, all that tied in, I thought we should each do a review of what this watch kind of means to us and the experience of wearing this watch. Because at this point, we'd all had them for a while. And so I took it upon myself. My review is much more of it's the most similar to a classic watch review. I made sure I put the specs in, but it wasn't like a table. I just did the specs and talked about how it worked. I talked some about some of Zodiac's history, some heritage to the Navy. I talked about how primarily through the Navy I wore G-Shocks, and how there's not really a naval heritage with G-Shocks, how we just kind of wear them because they're tools and they perform. But I don't think anyone's really like attached to the G-Shock. I mean, I could be wrong. If I am, leave it in the comments. But I haven't ever heard anyone talk about their G-Shock like, oh man, I love my G-Shock because blah 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 blah. No, so I was looking for something with a little naval heritage, and I thought maybe I found it in the Zodiac. And I talk about how important heritage and legacy are, and but also modernizing and updating equipment, how you can have a butting of heads to say at times, and how true leaders are able to meld that without too much conflict. And that's what I basically finished up in. I basically finished up with my review stating that it appears that Zodiac has pulled this off. It's a reissue, but not a cash grab. It's a beautiful timepiece. The finishing is wonderful. The case is wonderful. The dial is like this grayish black with like a gold sunburst on it. And it's just, oh man, the contrast is wonderful. It's a beautiful timepiece. Runs well, keeps good time, the whole nine. And that was my review. So then my wife's review, she's an educator. She works with kids, and she basically just talked about how, you know, back when she used to wear an Apple Watch or whatever, of how that kind of distracted her and it brought the outside world in. And uh, it was just not really, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not really using her words, but kind of like a nuisance, and how this kind of kept her grounded. And it kept her more present in the classroom kind of thing, and how she's come to trust it, and how it's got a lot more soul than an Apple Watch. And her big gripe again was about just, and it wasn't a big gripe, it was just, some constructive criticism, was just about the bracelet size. So, and then T's review finally was, he's a guy that always felt like a timepiece would make him a busybody, I guess, or make him someone who's kind of like stuck in the grind or whatever. And it's part of the reason why he always realized that he was checking his phone because he didn't have a watch. He was always looking for the time. And then he would start looking at his phone for like 15 minutes and realize he was wasting time. And my wife said the same thing that was similar in her review. So it was this thing about how for him, getting this timepiece finally gave him a tool that he could be connected to and not one that was a distraction. And how he gets to use it and take it places with him and have adventures. He's big in like the paddleboarding, surfing, stuff like that. So he's able to do all this stuff with it. He's able to establish his relationship with time. There's a bunch of stuff. And I'm going to put all the links to the reviews in the show notes. I recommend you go read them because each one of us gives a take on it that's slightly different with some similarities. And I just think that it was a very interesting and fun project to do. The Super Seawolf, the Zulu Oscar 9209, if you can get it, 40 millimeter case, perfect size, 11 millimeter thickness. It's just like the finishing on the case is perfect. It's got a nice little inscription, Super Seawolf, on the case back. It's just a wonderful, wonderful timepiece. And I recommend that if you can find one, that you definitely get one because I don't know, they're worth every penny. That's all I got to say. So I appreciate you tuning in for episode 14. Don't forget to tune into our live streams on Tuesdays, 19:30 or 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Sunday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on the Casual Watch Talk YouTube channel. Those are going pretty well. I really enjoy working with Sam on those. I dig Sam. He's a good guy, down to earth, super knowledgeable, is able to get really good guests on. I feel like every single time we're on the show, I'm learning something. I highly recommend that you check them out. This week's positive affirmation. I'll put it to you this way. When my computer crashed during the live stream on Tuesday night, I felt like I let everybody down. I really did. I was so bothered by it, and it took forever for my computer to reboot. And at that point, there's no point in me even being in the live stream because I had kind of missed too much of it. And I was kind of down on myself for a minute. But then, I've been working hard on a lot of other stuff and, 2, 3 good things back to back happened. And it gave me some perspective of when things happen that are out of your control, it can suck initially, but you can't beat yourself up over it, especially if it's something out of your control. And like Sam was super kind about it. He's like, hey, it happens. I understand it's tech. Stuff happens. And, thankfully I had the ability because I had been saving up and stuff I said, I'm going to get rid of this old computer and get a new one and just get set up in a professional little setup. And I'm able to do that. But don't knock yourself if something bad happens that you really have no control over. Stop and focus on the good stuff that happens, even the small wins. Because 90% of the time when you get a small win, you did a lot of work to get that small win. It's not like it just happened. It's not luck. If you worked hard and something good comes from that, stop and celebrate that. And if something bad happens, solve the problem and keep it moving. There's no point in beating yourself over. I'm sure you work too hard. I wish you all the best. I hope you guys have guys and ladies, whoever, have a great rest of your evening or morning or whenever you're listening to this. And just remember, at watchrolling.com, you make the watch. The watch doesn't make you.